Here we go on live. Jitin, YouTube is on. Okay. We welcome everyone to this meeting. We are going through a terrible time. Everybody is hoping and praying things will improve. Each one of us have gone through in a close circle. Some mishaps happen. It breaks our heart to see our precious ones are not losing their lives and have lost their lives. So really hope and pray things will improve. And each one of us are in our own way doing something to this crisis. And this is another effort to help all of us how we can do something about the crisis to change the situation. That is how we have organized. We have over 100 volunteers from the Indian Pharmaceutical Association. So they are the inspiration behind this program. They all came and joined, and the CPD, Community Pharmacy Division. That's a group of, Dr. Sunita is here, and she will say a little more about them later. So that's how we started this in order to equip them. They said, we are ready, you equip us, and then we are ready to reach out. That is how this webinar is happening. Now I will hand over to our president. We have actually our board members here, our Foundation for Sustainable Health India, our president, our vice president, our senior advisor and board member, Dr. Pratima ma'am is there. They are very supportive always. I've been working with them for the last 20 years. It's really indeed a privilege to work with them and get their support. It's really an encouragement. Over to my president, Dr. Ramesh Bilimanda.
Yeah. Thank you, Chanda. In fact, welcome to all of you and for our Foundation for Sustainable Health India. In fact, in this current situation of COVID-19 pandemic, it is not just our political leaders or any other hospitals only play a part. Every citizen, every NGOs in our country has to play their own role. So also our NGO has taken a lead called I Care and a call for action. And this is actually a response to the ongoing COVID-19 and a pandemic, and which is actually a public health crisis the whole world is going through, and more so India. We are all now flooded with information and many times myths and misconception. But to highlight and to give a right information, we need the experts who have got their skills and which can really guide us with the right information. We and from our society could able to understand, and there is a gap and between the COVID warriors who are treating our patients called COVID care management team and the common man in our villages, towns, and in the public. And this is our idea to fill up this gap, and we need quite a lot of volunteers. It's not just from our society. Our society is only a drop in the big ocean that we can really help. And these people, volunteers, need a right information, and so that they can help others. And this particular, the webinar is arranged and for that particular purpose, how best they can be equipped and with this information. Thanks to Dr. Sunita, and who is heading our steering core committee and who is enrolling our volunteer response pool and into this big game and which is needed and for our country. Today there are four eminent speakers, and they're eminent in their own sphere. Dr. Ravi, and a virologist and from government of Karnataka. Thank you, sir. And Dr. Vijayalakshmi Balakundre, very well known and pediatric cardiologist and from Jaideva Institute of Cardiology, and Dr. Anant Bhan and from Enapoya, and Dr. Pratima Murthy, Professor and Head and Psychiatry from NIMHANS. I welcome all of you, sir, for this webinar. I now hand over to Chandar, our Secretary of our Society.
So thank you, sir, for those kind words. Now I would request my co-host, Dr. Sunita, to introduce as first speaker, and also about other partners in this webinar. And to tell what about Dr. Sunita, I'm surprised to know Dr. Sunita was a patient, if I may say, a child patient of Dr. Ramesh. Isn't I don't know. Isn't you were a child when they were no? That's what you told me. If I'm getting correctly, your parents were in Mysore, and then isn't it? So you knew them from Dr. Ramesh and his wife since your childhood, to put it right. Yes. Over to Dr. Sunita.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And having known Dr. Ramesh since the age of 7 is one thing, but I'm glad I was not his patient, and I don't want to be one. Knowing him as a mentor is where I would like to go with that. So yeah, thanks for this opportunity for bringing in a lot of our volunteers. So where I would like to really put the emphasis is on the group called PSPP. Now, this is the Pharmacon Society for Pharmacy Practice. Dr. Karthik Rakam is the mentor of this particular group, and that is exactly where we are getting our close to 75 plus PharmD volunteers. Now, before I get into what our PharmD volunteers are being geared up for, just a few sentences about Dr. Karthik. He is a clinical pharmacist himself, and he has started several teaching modules for clinical pharmacists, so that they're getting that particular kind of a training. And where I would like to really emphasize is he's a mentor par excellence, because as a young leader, what he's doing is extremely important, and he's leading the talk rather than talking there. And he also has more than 270 core group of volunteers and mentees. And I'm consistently in touch with them for various parts of the COVID projects that I volunteer for with different organizations. So this is just to put on record the excellent work that Dr. Karthik is doing. And with his support, we are able to bring close to 60 to 75 volunteers that have joined. And what we have been basically doing with the help of Mr. Chandar as well is forming this cohort where we are training these people mainly for home quarantine part of it. So when patients are under home quarantine, what is it that we need to do as motivators to support the home caregivers? And also when patients are discharged from the hospitals, for that 1 week that they have to be at home and need to be taken care of, then how do we motivate them? How do we take care of whatever support that they need, as whether it is checking on their medication, whether it is any of the frequently asked questions, connecting them to whatever sources that we can do. That is where we are going. So we have already had sessions where Pooja Deshpande, one of the trained psychologists, has spoken to us more about how do we train home caregivers, how do we take care of the burnout syndrome, and basically create that awareness. Now, what is equally important is if this is surely a novel virus, but at least we understand that what are the few things we need to do for preventing the transmission. For a transmittable disease, if we are going through this kind of complications in the second wave, we can only imagine what is going to happen in the forthcoming one. So the more we gear up, the more we bring in the next generation leaders like Dr. Shivam Sakshi, who's here from Indian Institute of Management, who's a postdoc there, who is also gearing up towards 5 Gram Panchayat programs. So these are all different volunteers who are sitting here who are doing their bit. And I think it's a good place to acknowledge what they're doing and also to appreciate and basically support them. Now we move on to where we are heading today, because the 4 diverse and extremely experienced panelists, it's a blessing to have all of you under one roof for at least the next 1.5 hours. What you will be basically helping us out here is in training our volunteers a little better, because it is the infodemic which is the bigger part of this crisis along with the pandemic. So first on our panelist is Dr. Ravi, who's a virologist. He is also the nodal officer for the genomic sequencing of the virus, and he is from the government of Karnataka, Bengaluru. Dr. Ravi, thank you so much for making time for us, and everything that you're investing on us, it is being expanded. So thank you so much for what you're investing in our group. Welcome to you, and over to you, Doctor. You'll have to please unmute yourself.
Let me thank the organizers for having me on this panel discussion. I was told I should probably make a short presentation and followed by questions. Is that right?
Yes, sir. 10 minutes presentation, sir. And then we have 2 presentations. Dr. Vijayalakshmi Madam will follow you. Yeah. And then we will take questions for 20 minutes.
Okay. Can you see my screen, please?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I was asked to summarize what we have learned so far. And this is a novel virus. We know it's a coronavirus. It's called corona because it resembles the crown. It has projections on the surface. It is found in a variety of human, animal, and bird species. And we also know that prior to the advent of this virus, in late 2019, we had two other viruses that also caused severe acute respiratory syndrome. They were called the SARS and the MERS corona. We also now know that the new SARS-CoV-2, as it is called, was a spillover from bats to an anteater and then human beings, probably that occurred in a wet market in Wuhan in southern China in December 2019. During the last 1 year, we have learned a lot about coronavirus epidemiology. We know it's a respiratory virus transmitted by droplets. Droplets, if they are big, they fall because of gravity in 3 to 6 feet. They are small, they travel in air for. So initially it was said that it's droplet infection, then they revised saying airborne. It is both. Airborne when the droplets are less than 5 microns in diameter, they can travel up to 20, 30 feet, especially in indoor settings. And we know wearing masks protect. If both two people wear masks, the chances of transmission is less than 5%. Small, they travel in air. So initially it was said that it's droplet infection, then they revised saying airborne. It is both. Airborne when the droplets are less than 5 microns. It's repeating. Somewhere it's repeating. I'm sorry. Can somebody set that right? If both two people wear masks, the chances of transmission is less than 5%. Small, they travel in air. So initially it was said that it's droplet infection, and they revised saying airborne. It is both. Airborne when the droplets are less than 5 microns. It's repeating. There's some problem. As I'm speaking, it is repeating. Can somebody set that right, please?
Yes, sir. Could you please hold on? Sir, may I request?
Less than 5 microns. It's repeating. There's some problem. As I'm speaking, it is repeating. Can somebody set that right, please?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Jitin? Yes, sir. Could you please hold on? Sir, may I request? Yes, our tech person, Jitin, yes. Yes, sir. Our tech person is helping you, sir. Yeah, Jitin.
Yeah, sir, if there is any other device that is playing out, you can please mute that.
There's some problem. As I'm speaking, it is repeating. Can somebody set that right, please?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Jitin? Yes, sir. Could you please hold on? Sir, may I-
Okay, when two people wear masks, irrespective of whether one person is infected or not, the chances of transmission are very low, less than 5%. If the infected person wears mask, also the transmission is low. If both people don't wear masks, the chances of transmission are very high. We also knew that from epidemiology that the elderly were at highest risk during the first wave. Mortality was high, severity of disease was high in the elderly. We also knew that 80 to 90% of people who get the infection were mild or asymptomatic, and comorbidities played a major role in the mortality and severity. We also knew that symptomatic people transmitted infection more than asymptomatic people. The ratio was 1:4. And we also knew that the virus is causing lung disease mainly and disease in various organs, primarily because of the aggressive immune reaction, not because the virus kills cells. So one of the things that we learned in the first wave was that the second week is very crucial in the illness. But from the 5th day to the 10th day is when people deteriorate, if they have to deteriorate. And we know the full range of symptoms ranging from fever, cold, cough, breathlessness, myalgia, diarrhea, and loss of smell and taste. We also learned that COVID is a multi-system disorder, especially the complications can affect. Very quickly, very early in the epidemic, diagnosis was sorted out from the laboratory point. PCR was the diagnostic test. Antibody tests are useless for diagnosis, but they indicate that COVID vaccines came out in a record time of 9 months, and we have a variety of vaccines, whole virus vaccines, nucleic acid vaccines, and virus vectored vaccines. And these were released late last year by the end of our first wave. And there was a lot of concern on safety, but these vaccines have been extensively tested in the preclinical phase and the clinical phase, and we know that the vaccines are very safe, and the efficacy of these vaccines vary from anywhere from 70% to 95%. And we have about 8 vaccines that have been licensed for use across the world. India is using currently 2 vaccines. One is not listed here, and that is the Covaxin, which is our own Indian indigenous killed virus whole virus vaccine, and AstraZeneca, which is a adenovirus-based vector vaccine. Very recently, government has given permission for Sputnik. It is yet to come into the market in India. So with this background, most people wrote off Corona in this country, although some of us have been warning that Corona will come back. It will come as a second wave and it will be bigger than the first wave. Why did this occur? And currently we are in the peak of the second wave. The warnings by scientists and public health people were ignored. Many factors have contributed to the second wave. Primarily, it started as small super spreading events in many urban cities, including Bangalore. And this was because people stopped wearing masks. There was excessive crowding, there were rallies, elections, and religious congregations, which actually was the main reason for the explosion of this outbreak and pandemic in the second wave. The second wave is steeper, bigger, and it caught us unawares because we were not ready for the kind of surge, and with poor planning in terms of bed availability, in terms of oxygen and essential drugs. Now, different states are going to peak at different time. And of course, the main reason why we are struggling now is the system responded very late. We also knew that by the beginning of this year, very late last year, that virus is mutating. This was again a surprise because nobody expected coronaviruses to mutate as much as it has done. And the mutant started spreading. The first mutant that was recognized was the UK variant. It spread across the globe in a matter of 3-4 months. Now we have 5 mutants that are of international concern because they are spreading to many countries. The South African, the Brazilian, the UK were the first 3. Earlier we had a Californian mutant, and that mutant mutated again to become a double mutant, which was detected in India, and we called this the double mutant or the Maharashtra mutant. Now this is spreading very fast, and you can see this is the I picked up this map. It started in India. It is now spread to 46 countries across the globe. It's spreading very fast. It's more infectious, and that's why the WHO and Public Health England have called it variant of concern. Now, what about the future? This photograph on the left, I'm very fond of. It's going to be a road with many road humps, and we are likely to have multiple waves of this infection. Why do I say that? Look around. Europe has completed or is in its third wave. America is in its fourth wave. Many Asian countries like Japan, Taiwan, Singapore are in their third wave. So we must learn from these lessons, and I'm pretty sure that there will be a third wave. Now, what this third wave is going to, when is it going to be, and what is going to look like? Generally, waves are 3 to 5 months apart after one wave subsides. So we'll have to get ready for the third wave towards the end of this year. SARS-CoV-2 is a new virus, so you'll get immunity only through infection or vaccination. We know already that vaccination, we are not going to be able to vaccinate all our population by this year end because we have a staggering 100 crore adults. And of course, we don't have a vaccine for children. So we have to expect that in the next wave, a large proportion of them will be children. We'll also have the same number of adults who are not vaccinated. So beds, oxygen, essential drugs for adults, and that has to continue. We have to stop crowding. I think we should postpone elections, rallies, and not have any gatherings. Wearing masks and maintaining distance has to continue for one more year. Now we need to discuss and take a decision on how we are going to open schools. If we are going to open schools, is it going to be interrupted? Is it going to be continuous physical schooling, or is it going to be online? Now this is the time to discuss all that. So COVID vocabulary, we have learned a lot. We know what mutation is. Instead of talking about the virus, I think we should mutate our behavior. We should learn to wear masks. We should quarantine and social distance, not human beings, but we should quarantine and social distance crowds, crowding, religious gatherings, and elections. I think we should accept wearing mask and maintaining distance as a new normal. There's whole lot of information, more than 70% of it is misinformation. So this infodemic correction has to happen. We need to have positive messaging, and we need to have messages that will change behavior, not based on fear, but balanced with giving hope. So I'll stop here. I think I've touched the salient points.
Thank you, sir. We will, during the discussion hour, we can take more questions and then respond, sir. Thank you very much. Sir has been, I think every day he's addressing some panel, been very helpful in dealing with this infodemic. Now I would request my Vice President, Dr. Vijayalakshmi Balakundari. We've been working together with ma'am for the last 15 years or more. She's a very much, though she's a pediatrician, pediatric cardiologist, very much grassroots oriented, very much public oriented. Ma'am, it's a privilege to have you with us. Please go ahead. Vijayalakshmi madam should be unmuted. Ma'am, please unmute. Jitin, unmute. Madam, we can't hear you.
Doctor, we are unable to hear you. Doctor, we are unable to hear you.
Dr. Vijayalakshmi, you could try removing your earphones and unplugging it from the system and then speaking.
Doctor, still unable to hear you.
Ma'am, if you can remove your earphones and try, it will be good, I think.
No, we can't hear you.
Alvin, please repeat your instruction.
Ma'am, can you ask her to unmute, no, remove the earphones and try with the laptop audio?
She was first doing the same thing and then she has put on the earphones. So I suppose the drivers are not performing well on her computer.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, drivers are not. Please tell me somebody what to do.
Well, that is a thing to be done inside computer. I mean, it is a long process. I don't think she. So she'll have to update her drivers.
Okay.
The device manager, she'll have to go to the device manager and then look for the drivers and then uninstall them, install them, or at least update them. That's.
So
Chandra, maybe
the option.
she can join using her mobile phone for the audio. She has
Yeah,
no
that
other
would be
Yes, sir,
fine.
that
Maybe
makes
she can
sense, sir.
use her mobile phone to. That's the better option.
And the other option is if Dr. Anand Bal or Dr. Pratima wants to talk now, we can give Dr. Vijayalakshmi the time to organize this.
If Dr. Anand would like to speak first, most welcome. Or I can speak.
Dr. Pratima, you said that Dr. Anand Bal is that?
Yeah, I'm actually not going to be using a presentation, so Dr. Pratima can present. I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah. What I can do is perhaps, if Dr. Vijayalakshmi is okay, she's still trying to talk.
No, she's still trying to talk.
So if it's okay, maybe I will start and talk to you about some of the mental health issues that have arisen out of this pandemic. We know it's been a global problem. It's been global learning, not just from the physical dimensions of the problem, but also the mental health repercussions. And practically everybody has been affected. I think it would be very useful to trace the whole genesis in terms of mental health distress from the last year until now. During the wave one, particularly during the lockdown, I think what we discussed were the fears about the virus, the infodemic, people worrying, and misinterpreting symptoms that they had, to in some ways a readiness fatigue, because we probably, we had a lot of things we thought in place, but it didn't really give us the extent of the enormity. It was not revealed in the first wave. In the post-lockdown, of course, in the first wave, there were reports of increased stress among people. We came to know about stress and mental health problems among all the frontline workers. There were also emerging reports of the effects of lockdown in terms of people making adjustments in their day-to-day life. But more importantly, towards the end of the lockdown, toward the end of that last year, we came to know about possible increasing incidents of domestic violence at home, emerging problems among children, particularly emotional problems among children. Certainly during the lockdown, a reduction in the use of substances because they were not available, but an increase in alcohol-related, withdrawal-related emergencies. Post-lockdown, of course, with the opening up of alcohol vends, there was an increase in alcohol intoxication-related issues. Subsequently, in the last year, we have been seeing perhaps an escalation of the panic and fear. And this time, in some ways, there has been a whole spectrum of mental health responses to the pandemic in the second wave. I'll start off with the most serious consequences, which has been grief following bereavement. I think this is something that a lot of people have experienced, where they've lost a loved one, where they've not been able to stay in the hospital with the loved one, and actually, very significantly, have not been able to participate in the last rites of their loved one. And that has been extremely traumatic to people who have undergone this. There is obviously a sense of grief, and we all know that people go through different stages of grief. There is a shock and denial of the problem. There is a lot of anger towards others, towards the system. There is what is called the stage of bargaining. And then there's a stage of despair, and then the stage of acceptance. But grief is an overwhelming phenomenon. And I think with the grief is also the fact that the rituals that we have following grief, how we all get together, we kind of share the grief, there is a closure. And that we are prevented because of the COVID pandemic. When you go one step, and to me, that is the most distressing thing that people have faced. When I know a colleague who has lost both his parents to the pandemic and could not be there in the hospital with them. And that's extremely thing. There is also a tremendous amount of guilt that comes in such situations that people have to learn to deal with. When you go to the next step, it is about the illness. We know now that COVID, is kind of lots of families have undergone it, and multiple family members have also been infected. And then that can again cause a lot of worry, a lot of misinterpretation of symptoms, unsureness about when to test, what tests to do, whether to go ahead and get a CT scan. So these are all tremendous things, what medications to take. There is so much confusion among people because they don't follow just the scientific guidelines, but they tend to kind of get information from a variety of sources, and that leads to problems. The second problem is about caregiving, especially when the caregivers in the family have to be hospitalized and there are young children at home and so on. And especially when caregivers, particularly parents, have kind of expired. We have an emerging problem of the COVID orphans, and we have to look at, as a society, how we're going to deal with that. The third is the financial aspects of the crisis, and certainly, financial distress. We've seen problems in terms of daily wage workers and how they're impacted. Today, there was a DG of the railways who came in for a discussion and said that he has observed, for example, an increase in suicidality. And we know that one of the things that can happen when there is severe distress is an increase in suicidality, consequent to the emotional problems, to the financial problems, to other various aspects in society. But these are the extreme parts of the spectrum. We must remember, as we know from the first wave, that 80 to 85% of people recover without any major problems. Perhaps about 10% require hospitalization, and it's about 5% who have severe forms of infection. I think one of the other things that has been changing is also that we have seen younger people being affected, so people in their prime being taken away, and that can be very distressing to parents who are left behind. But moving back to the situation for the 85% of us, the fear, the panic, And in some ways, the uncertainty is something that is a cause of a lot of stress for people. And this stress can manifest with sleep disturbances, with appetite disturbances, with feelings of sadness, loneliness, boredom, stress, and panic. And that can be very troublesome, both from the mental health point of view as well as the physical point of view. In addition, we probably also see an increase in the use of substances to deal with this kind of stress. There are certain groups of people who are extremely vulnerable both to stress and, of course, both to depression and anxiety, which are described as the common mental disorders as a consequence of the tremendous amount of emotional difficulties during this period. I won't go into the symptoms of each of them, but it's not, one must understand that if you have symptoms over at least a week or 2 weeks is when you label them as common mental disorders and differentiate them from stress. The other thing that we are now hearing about is post-traumatic stress disorder. Particularly, we hear it among healthcare workers who have seen a lot of death and dying, families who've been through this trauma, people who've been in ICUs, etc., where they have constant flashbacks of the stressful event, they have episodes of panic, they have sleep and appetitive disturbances, and a huge amount of agitation when they're reminded of the situations that they were in. Now, there are different groups of people who are extremely vulnerable. Of course, we've read about the increased amount of mental health morbidity among frontline workers. And it's among frontline workers, nurses are perhaps one of the most affected people, especially young women nurses who have to deal with both their professional stress as well as the personal responsibilities they have at home. We know that there have been tremendous stress among the police who have to manage law and order. This time we are also hearing about stress among ambulance drivers who have to ferry sick patients who are doing much more of this, hardly going back to their homes. Crematoria workers who have to deal with a lot of end stage processes as far as people are concerned, daily wage workers. We heard Dr. Ravi mention in the end of his presentation about children perhaps going to be affected in the subsequent waves of the pandemic. So there are, already the children are at great emotional pressures with a lot, with the work, with the being at home constantly, the lack of ability of, playing with their peers, about worries and fears about separation and illness. So that's another group of people who are vulnerable. The elderly are extremely vulnerable. In the last wave, it was about feeling lonely, feeling, neglected, and not being well connected, particularly if they were not digitally connected. But now with the elderly, there are fears of abandonment, there are fears of illness, there are fears of death, which have compounded problems for the elderly. Similarly, pregnant women who are extremely worried about the impact of COVID on both them and the unborn child, and find it very difficult to seek services, especially during the antenatal period. People in correctional facilities, where we know that when there are COVID outbreaks, or people in institutions, these can also have huge consequences. But then how do we deal with this? I think the first and most important thing is to recognize that certain emotional responses are appropriate, they are there for some time, and then if you learn how to deal with them, they will actually subside. The second thing are the common things that we tell everybody, proper diet, proper exercise in the limited ways that you can do it at home, providing, even though you have to maintain physical distance, make sure you're connected with people so that you are supported and others are also supported, making sure you have access to the right kind of information, but also some degree of COVID preparedness should you become infected, should you need to go into hospital, so that your arrangements for care for yourself and for your near and dear ones is done. So some degree of pragmatism, but at the same time being able to be calm and to kind of face challenges is a very important thing. So one is at the level of self-help. The other thing is, of course, being aware of one's own stress threshold. And there are some of us who can handle a lot of stress. Some people are very vulnerable to stress, and therefore being aware of that and trying to see to avoid things that increase this stress. And one of the things, for example, is to constantly be bombarded with information and visuals that that are very, very depressing and that are very anxiety triggering. The second is to learn to adapt to new situations and be resilient. And that's something that we have to learn. How do we deal with work from home? How do we deal with financial stresses? How do we plan the day to day? Having a daily routine is possibly a very, very important thing. Being in touch with one's thoughts, actions, and feelings is another thing that helps a person at an individual level deal with some of the stresses of the particular situation. Establishing routines is extremely important, and particularly important now is having a good sleep routine, so that there is some degree of normalcy, at least at a personal level, that is restored. The other thing that people talk about more and more is compassion, kindness to yourself, kindness to others, and some degree of altruism in trying to help others, and working towards this as something that in which all of us are together so that we can get out of it, and helping people particularly in distress. Connectedness is something that I mentioned, social connectedness. Managing uncertainty is very, very important, and perhaps that's a lot of people manage it in different ways, haven't got time to go into those details, but certainly that's very important. And of course, while recognizing that the severe consequences are there, we also need to recognize that this is something that is hopefully going to get better after some time. The last part I just wanted to mention, particularly since we deal with people with severe mental illness, this is another group of people who are extremely vulnerable at the time of these pandemics, both in terms of having an exacerbation of their symptoms because maybe they're not regular with their medication, also perhaps having even more impacts of loneliness, distress, lack of support, loss of family members. So this is another group that we need to look after very carefully. And finally, the group with other chronic diseases, with particularly the non-communicable diseases where hospital visits are reduced, their connection with their doctors are reduced. This is another group that needs support. So all of us need some degree of self-help and mental health support. There are people who are vulnerable who need even more support. And we need to develop networks to provide that kind of support, both in a non-professional manner as well as in a professional manner. I leave you with those thoughts. Thank you very much.
Madam, thank you very much for this very useful thoughts. It is heartbreaking what we are going through. We desperately want things to end soon. As I know, NIMHANS has been, I think I worked in the past since 2019. I worked in 3 major disasters in the globe. In Bangladesh, I went over in all this, and then tsunami and then Marathwada. So NIMHANS was with us, giving this very useful information support. Indeed, you and the department are very helpful, ma'am. So we hope to continue to look up to you. And then as we move on, how we could really, it's very painful. No answers, how we're going to help people who are going through severe trauma, this post, in many families. Let's hope together, I think we can help as a society, whatever way we could. So we'll move on to the next presentation. Sorry for the inconvenience. Dr. Vijayalakshmi ma'am is there. Over to you, ma'am. Audio again is not there. Audio? Again, your audio is a problem, ma'am. Jitin, can you help? Can you sort out ma'am's audio? Hello? Ma'am, your audio is not there. Can we take it later? I'll request Jitin to help you. We'll request Dr. Anantman to come over. We are not able to hear.
Thanks, Chandra. So, again, an honor to be on the panel today, with such eminent senior colleagues. I don't have a formal presentation, but just maybe some thoughts, which I thought might help us prime the discussion. One of the things I think which is relevant is sort of the background to the pandemic. The pandemic is sort of a once in a lifetime experience for most of us.
Anant, 1 second, Dr. Anant. Dr. Vijayalakshmi, apologies, we are not able to hear your audio. I will request Jitin, I'm requesting Jitin to help you sort out. Ma'am, in the meantime, we'll go ahead with Dr. Anand. Ma'am, I'm sorry for the inconveniences, know what's happening. Kindly bear with us, ma'am. Yes, Anand, over to you.
Sure. So what I was saying is that the pandemic is probably a once in a lifetime experience for most of us, but it tells us something, and it tells us something very, very much prominently about our health system, and that health system has been clearly caught underprepared. So as as future health professionals, especially our body of volunteers, this is extremely important because this is something we need to address as a community. The fact that our health system needs to be more resilient, it needs to be better resourced. Over the last 1.5 years of dealing with the pandemic, we have all realized that there are several deficiencies in the health system, anywhere from epidemiology, lab networks, surveillance, capacity within the health system at various levels, primary, secondary, tertiary, and inability to have adequate human resources. Often what you see is a lot of ICUs and ventilators are built up, but then where are the human resources to staff these kind of advanced facilities? And that's something you cannot create overnight. The fact that we could have learned from last year's experience in sort of building that capacity better, but both at various levels, both at the central and state level, we've seen that being a failure. There's not been so a lot of hiring which happened was short term, not long term in nature. So I think that is something which we need to really talk about. What can we do better, and what is the need for public health advocacy around that, so that we have more resilient health systems. The second thing I think which is important even for our volunteers is the realization that while there's been so much explicit focus on COVID-19 over the last many months, it's important to recognize that that has also had a negative ramification on non-COVID-19 care. And that did happen last year. Then we had a slight bit of, a few months where there was some relief. But now we are again in a situation where everything is COVID largely. And you even have super specialty hospitals, tertiary referral centers, which are almost entirely focusing on COVID. So what does this mean for those of our patients who require non-COVID care, whether that be long-term non-communicable disease care, that be dialysis care, that be mental health care, that would be anyone requiring surgical interventions which are non-emergency in nature, tuberculosis, malaria, a whole lot of other conditions which have probably faced a lot of setback. And I think that is also important to understand, and for the volunteers who will be working, especially in community-based settings, to try to figure out that if there are people out there who have undiagnosed or diagnosed medical conditions which might not be COVID related, but still require care, what is the pathway that we can build for them? Are there existing referral mechanisms that we can leverage, because obviously care for them is extremely important. In fact, with COVID right now, one of the major issues also is going to be the rampant overuse of medications, polypharmacy that we are seeing, and that by itself is potentially going to put us in a situation with areas such as antibiotic resistance, beyond what we already have. Because if you look at the kind of prescriptions which are being used right now, these are really troublesome. Many of them are not evidence-based. Many of them involve usage of multiple medications. Many of them involve usage of antibiotics, sometimes more than one antibiotics. Many of them use steroids, and steroids certainly have a role to play, but you need to do it with supervision, etc. But the steroid misuse that we are seeing also has a lot of ramifications, and many of you would have also heard about one of the potential issues around the spread of mucormycosis, or the so-called black fungus, which we are already dealing with. So that I think is certainly an important area to focus on, that what can we do in terms of getting better care for those you're going to be working with in the community, but also realize that there might be non-COVID care requirements that we need to focus on. Perhaps the other thing to sort of talk about also is that our approaches in the way we deal with these kind of situations need to be thought through in cricketing terms more like a test match rather than a T20 response. And often what we see from the policy circles is a response which is very much short-sighted and short-term in basis, and rather than building longer-term capacity in being able to do things better. And if we had that right from the beginning, perhaps we would have done a better job. The issue of misinformation, I think, is another one where a lot of our volunteers, I think, would be especially relevant. There is a lot of lack of understanding of COVID in the community, especially in urban poor settings and in our rural households. It's actually also true of the better to do financially households as well, because there is so much information which is being shared via social media. So the so-called WhatsApp University, as we refer to. So people taking medications, using steam, using all kinds of homemade remedies with the belief that this will prevent COVID or this is useful for COVID treatment. The fact that there have been medications which have been sometimes supported by government, which have no no basis in evidence at all, and these are still being widely used. The fact that there are some misconceptions around vaccination and vaccines which need to be cleared. There are some genuine concerns about vaccines, which hopefully we can also discuss today when the Q&A session happens. But it's very important, I think, for the right information to go out, because in the absence of that, we will see a lot of people probably accessing anything from testing to care late. And we know, especially with COVID, that someone can very quickly transition from mild disease to moderate to severe. And I think time is of the essence. So that, I think, is another element which is really important to address. The link to that is also making sure that we have situations, and whenever we prepare working with communities, of thinking through the referral pathways, whether that be for transport of patients, whether that be for mental health referral where required, because you might be able to do same level of primary counseling if you've been trained for that. But there will be individuals who will require specialized referral, and you need to know and plan in advance for those kind of referral services so that you're able to leverage them. So I think whenever we think of volunteering, a lot of background work is extremely important. It's not just about going into the field, but also about preparing for that situation where you have the right information with yourself, you also have the right support systems, you have referral pathways built in, you have individuals you can reach out to, which is I think really important to address as well. So on the vaccine side, I think right now also there's going to be a fair bit of confusion, especially because as you know, there is a bit of a shortage of vaccines. There are these multiple pathways through which vaccines can be obtained, either the state government, the central government, or private health systems. They have different price points. There are new vaccines going to come in. There are concerns around adverse events following vaccination. There is a lack of clarity on when vaccines will be available. So people are registering on the COVID platform, but yet not getting slots, etc. So I think just educating yourself also around vaccines and vaccination policy and what you can tell people so that they are a bit more reassured is extremely important, including on safety issues, including around dosing, including around how vaccines are being administered and why it is important to get vaccines. So I think if we build that knowledge up within ourselves, we will be much better placed in being able to respond to patient needs. The other thing I think which is probably quite relevant, especially because there's a lot of pharmacy students involved in the initiative, is helping people understand the importance of being careful with the drugs that they are ingesting. A lot of people are now taking a lot of medications over the counter. Some of those might have drug-to-drug interactions. And as pharmacy students who have expertise, it's really important to look at that as well from a patient education perspective. So I think it might be good for us to maybe discuss some of these. I know we have around an hour remaining. If Dr. Vijay Lakshmi can speak, then I'd be happy to maybe explain things more during the discussion rather than spend more time on my initial remarks. So Chanda, maybe back to you, and then we can take it forward.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Anand. Ma'am, are you ready, or we need some time? No, ma'am, still we can't hear. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, ma'am. Please.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Over to you, ma'am.
ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಪ್ಪ. Okay, sorry everybody. Thank you very much for your patience, and I have a feeling I'm a congenitally positive, pessimistic person, optimistic person. So whatever happens for good. So all the three speakers, Dr. Ravi, Dr. Pratima, and Dr. Anand, they have already laid the foundation. And for me, it is very easy to go ahead now. In the first wave, the whole world was worried because they didn't know anything about the virus, and the 218 countries were shattered. And already Dr. Ravi has told you that it is a genetically engineered virus that came from Wuhan. And now we have already double mutant one, And what is worse, it is affecting the children more than the others. And here you have to see that whole the Europe, North America total population is 1,34 lakhs. And they have 87 prime ministers, and we have 1,39 lakh people and 1 person. And unless the whole country, every citizen of India joins hand and fights as a warrior, we are not able to defeat this corona. And Dr. Ravi has already told you about the genome and everything. But I would like to highlight here that this virus doesn't have wings or doesn't have the hands or legs to run or fly. It has to move from one person to another person. And what is important is it has got a capsule which has got a lipid capsule or the fat. And that dissolves in the soap and also in the alcohol. And it has got a sugar molecule on the spike. And this sugar molecule, it camouflages this virus, almost makes it appear all like our own body cell. And as a result, our antibodies are unable to recognize which is a virus and which is the body cell. And that's how we know it is like a terrorist which has come in the guise of our own people. This gets into the cells. And these spikes are very important. They act as a key to get into the cell. So once they stick into the nose, mucosa, or the throat, they go into the cell through this key. I mean, this spike acts like a key to enter the cell. And as a result, this is so important that once you understand this mechanism, then you will realize why the doctors and the health people are asking you to wash your hands repeatedly and also the scrub. So here you can see that we have 6 steps to scrub, and for 20 seconds you have to scrub because the soap will disrupt the lipid, that is the fat capsule. And when you rub nicely, the palm and the top and in between the fingers and the, all these 6 steps, at this time the spikes will break. And once the spikes break, that virus cannot enter our body cell. And once the sugar is dissolved in the water, it is no more acts like a camouflage, and as a result our body can recognize. So these are the 3 important things that everybody should understand. The washing the hands is to disrupt the membrane of the virus so that it becomes inactive. The scrubbing is that is rubbing is important to break the spikes, and then the water is important to dissolve the sugar molecule. And here you must remember, everywhere we may not have the soap and water, and then we use the sanitizer. And the sanitizer has to have 70% alcohol, and everything including the mobile and anything that an infected person touches, that has to be sanitized. And the children especially, they have to understand not only the washing the hands, when they are sneezing and coughing, they have to cover their face, brushing their teeth, and gargling every day, twice or thrice, is extremely important for the children. And unless we make it as a habit for them, it is not possible to inculcate good habits into them. Now, why are we asking the people to have the social distancing? One should understand the social distancing is asked because whenever a person sneezes or coughs at the speed of 106 kilometers per hour, millions of organisms, that is millions of coronavirus, are thrown out of the nose and the mouth through the droplets. See, the IPL game also was cancelled because of the corona. And you know, in IPL game, only one bowler will be bowling at the speed of 90, 96, at the most 100. But here, 106 kilometers per hour. And there only one ball is there. So the batsman can hit a sixer or a four. But here, the opponent who's in front of you becomes sick within 3 to 5 days. And that's how it is very important to maintain the distance so that whenever you cough or sneeze, that droplet that is coming from the infected person doesn't go to the nose, eyes, and the mouth of the person who's in front of you. Apart from that, spitting in the public places is a very, very bad habit that the Indians have got. Everywhere you see the people spitting, and when they spit also, the infected person can throw crores and crores of virus outside. So the children should learn that spitting should not be done, and that's how they have started punishing. Dr. Ravi already showed you that if both infected and non-infected people, they don't wear, it is like a wildfire, it spreads. But when both infected person and non-infected person, they wear the mask, naturally the infecting rate will come down. And here, most of the people I find either putting the dupatta or the kerchief. And remember, the kerchief or dupatta is not going to help at all, because this will have a zero filtering of the virus when you wear the matching mask for yourself. So it is more of a cosmetic purpose, but it doesn't scientifically help you. So if you want to really wear, you have to wear a surgical mask like this. And once you wear the surgical mask, you have to press here so that there is no gap between your cheek and the thing. And when you want to remove, you have to put the fingers like this and remove without touching the front portion, because the front portion is the one where there is a virus, and each one of you should realize that without touching that one, you just remove it like this, and when you come home, put it into the Dettol or the Savlon water, and then keep it for 15 minutes, wash it, and then reuse. Suppose you are going into the high-risk places where the crowd is too much, then at that time you have to wear not one, two masks. When you wear two masks, you have got a double filtration, and N95 and N95 masks are the best if you are going to the hospital to see your relative and infected people are there around you, or at home there is an infected person in quarantine. So you want to protect yourself. These are the masks to be used and not the cloth mask. And remember, wearing the mask is very important. On one side, the government is making enormous effort to control. So just from 2 virology centers, now we have 1,500 centers all over the country. And Dr. Ravi will agree with you that the virologists have contributed tremendously in controlling. But what's the problem with the people is, the people are not supporting. And remember, we cannot clap with one hand. So the government as well as the people, the society, they have to work together. And here, especially in the second wave, more youngsters are affected, the deaths are more. And in the last 10 days in Karnataka, 6,800 children are affected. 6,800 is not a small amount, a small number. And especially when you go to the third wave, it is going to be catastrophic. And we always say the children are our future, and always the Prime Minister was proud about the young people. Now, if we lose the young and the children, what is going to be the future of our country? And hence one should remember. In adult, everybody says the sore throat and the itching and the coughing, but in children, they may just have a fever and breathing problem, and they may not have the regular symptoms like an adult, but instead they may present with the nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and tiredness. So when the child says the loose motions or a stomachache, the parents tend to think that it is the food in the thing or the water contamination. And that's the reason they don't bring the child to the doctor. And apart from that, when the child says tiredness, they'll say that, oh, child has been no school and jumping around, and that's why it is tired. And that is how the children are missed, and then they are not brought in time to the doctor. And another important thing is, the most of the children are asymptomatic spreaders. They bring the infection and they spread it to the parents and the grandparents, or they get it from the parents and then they remain asymptomatic. So most of the parents, they take it for granted that the child is all right. And what is the most unfortunate thing is, after 2 to 3 weeks, the child becomes suddenly very sick. It has vomiting, it has got tiredness, and then goes into the multi-system inflammatory syndrome. That means the child's immunity is low, but first time when there is a small viral load, the number of virus are less. At that time, it doesn't suffer. It is asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. And suddenly after 3 weeks, the antigen antibody war starts. And at that time, all the organs in the body start getting affected. And especially here, the adult, they always look at the lungs, but in children, the heart can have the problem with the viral myocarditis, brain can be affected with the encephalitis, or there can be diffuse involvement of all the organs in the body, and hence this multi-system inflammatory syndrome is very, very, very disastrous. And unless the government has already woken up, they are preparing the ICU for the children and they are treated on a war footing, saving the children becomes very, very difficult. And hence it is important that any loss of taste or loss of smell or loose motion, pain abdomen, especially the small intestine, the last portion is called as the ileum, that is near the appendix, and it appears almost like an appendicitis, but it is a corona. And hence the high suspicion index is very important in children, and especially if any family member has got, one has to be very, very careful about it. So if the child gets infected, what should you do? Isolate the child. Isolating the child is not very easy. The mother has to be there or the father has to be there. So one has to choose, only one person must be with the child and rest of them should be isolated separately. Otherwise, the whole family will be affected. We have recently seen that both the parents have died and the children have become orphans. And it is so sickening and so heartening, and my heart goes out to these little children. There is no one to look after them. And as a result, it is very important to isolate. And if it is more than 2 years old, if it is breathless, then oxygen can be given or the mask can be given. But one thing people should realize, that corona is going to damage much more if the person is smoking. So whether it is an adult or it is a child who has started smoking, one should remember not to smoke and damage your lungs, so that when the corona comes, your lungs are strong enough and they are not already damaged. And hence, smoking and alcohol must be kept away. And you might have seen in the TV that the moment the lockdown is announced, the people are rushing to the wine shops to collect the wine. And they are having a wrong notion in the head that alcohol sanitizer can kill the virus. So if they drink alcohol every day, it will kill. No, it is not going to kill the virus, it will kill you. And as a result, the smoking and the drinking must be kept away. And more than 100 infected ladies have delivered. Fortunately, very few newborn babies have got the corona. Rest of them, only 2 of them, and rest of them are normal. And hence, friends, remember the new manners and etiquettes that we have to remember: not to spit here and there, not to travel unnecessarily, because this coronavirus travels along with the traveler. If the infected person is coming from America to India, the coronavirus is brought in his body, because his body is like a tank of coronavirus. And as a result, unnecessarily traveling should be avoided. And touching the eyes, nose, and the mouth, the children should learn. Now we tell in Kannada, kai bai shuddhavagirbeku. That means your hand and the mouth must be clean, and that has to be taught to the children. And don't unnecessarily indiscriminate. Many people, what they're trying to do is, anybody is affected, oh, he is positive, he is positive. So don't ill-treat the person who is positive. Try to help them rather than getting away from them. And social distancing at any time is extremely important. And as Dr. Ravi said, right now the vaccine is given above the 18 years. But however, the trials are going on to give about 12 years. And soon we are going to get the intranasal spray, and that too of the Covaxin from about 2 years. So that may take another few months, and until then, the children have to be taught. Remember, those who have got the vaccine, the lungs are spared. Those who do not get vaccine, the lungs are totally damaged. Now the TV is showing the people are asking for oxygen, 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 oxygen everywhere. See, oxygen is all round. It is like, you know, you are the sailor and all round there is a water, but you cannot drink because it is a saline water. In the same way, oxygen is there, but the lungs are not able to take it. And that's why the high pressure oxygen has to be given through the nose or through the mask, or it has to be given through the endotracheal tube. And you must see that this is a 104 years old lady. She has put so many plants, more than 384 banyan trees. We give high amount of oxygen, and she is capable of blessing even the president, the first citizen of India. And we have to learn and live from her, grow the trees and do the take exercise. And here you can see that in the children, putting the mask or the oxygen food and treating is very difficult. So very important is every child in their childhood, they should learn yoga, dhyana, especially pranayama. When one starts doing pranayama, whether you are infected or not infected, with the pranayama, you can control your mind so well, and your mind becomes very calm, and even asthma, the symptoms also will come down. And what is more important is from NIMHANS, from where Dr. Ravi and Pratima come, they have done the study. When 20 minutes Om is chanted, the limbic system blood supply comes down, and the anger, the negativity and everything comes down. And as a result, the person starts feeling much better with that. So Kapalbhati, I have tried it when I went to Manasarovar Kailas Parvata Parikrama. When you keep doing that Kapalbhati, oxygen can be taken much more. So friends, to conclude, we must stop blaming each other, and we have to start helping each other, because the social distancing is only for the body, but our mind should not be distant from each other. We have to see that we work as a team, whether the poor or the rich. The mother is not only there to protect the children, she has to protect not only from the sunlight, even from the corona. And if a worker can take care of her children, why not the others? And stop aping at the West. Stop aping at the West, because whatever the people did in that, the enjoying, the partying or the night club, that is the one which spreads. And especially in the theaters, it spreads. And many speakers, including Ravi, went on telling that it is the religious and the political, more than the political and the religious, it is the theaters, it is the pictures which are destroying our youngsters. Not only they are showing the glorifying the smoking, and in the closed compartment of the theater, if one infected person is there, not 3 feet, the virus can float in the air throughout the theater and infect all of them. And as a result, stop going. So do not inaugurate the third wave by cutting the mask. Joe Biden might tell no mask for the Americans, but for Indians, the mask is a must. It is a must. Mask is the best vaccine, and one should start wearing not 1, 2, and that to the surgical mask. And friends, instead of aping at the West, let us be Indians and do namaskara. When you shake hand, your infection goes to the other person, and his virus comes to your hand. Instead of that, the whole world is looking at India, and this is the time to control. Let us wear masks for 15 days, double mask, each one of us. The coronavirus will come down, because replication stops at 10th day, and after that it doesn't. And during that time, if you don't spread the infection, instead of government asking the police to handle you and give a danda, learn yourself the lesson that you are the soldiers. Each one of us has to be the corona warriors and control. Thank you very much for the kind and the patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I would like to thank all the esteemed panelists, Dr. Ravi sir, and Pratima ma'am, Dr. Anandban, and then Dr. Vijayalakshmi ma'am. So thank you so much. Dear friends, they are with us. They are accessible to us. Anytime you have a concern, a question to ask them, you need a guidance from them, any of the panelists, please reach out to us. we'll be able to connect you with them or get an advice from them and pass it on to you. Now is time for, we'll take few questions. If need be, we can extend it for a few minutes. Otherwise, we will go on with the question. If Dr. Sunita is ready, you can give the questions to the panelists.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. Dr. Vijayalakshmi, thank you for inspiring us. You know, the four of you have made such a deep impact. And what Dr. Anand was saying is extremely important. You know, as much as our enthusiasm is taking us there, we have to prepare ourselves because nobody is an expert in one specific area. And the questions that comes across the board. So I think that is exactly where we are investing the energy now, in order to prepare the volunteers from across the board, right from the condition to certain things about vaccination. But most importantly, to say if we don't know something, we don't know. We can come back. You know, not to make up answers. This is not an exam where hook or crook we have to pass it. So thank you for making all this happen. I think the first question is to Dr. Pratima. Where one of the members who joined us, basically she's a headmistress at Delhi Public School in Secunderabad, Mrs. Suma Banerjee. She wanted to know, Dr. Pratima, if there's a helpline where people can reach out to your organization or organizations similar to yours.
Yeah, there is a national helpline which is advertised, on the public media, on social media as well. And this psychosocial helpline, I understand has received more than 5 lakh calls, and for various things. A lot of it are queries about, where people can get various kinds of resources. But now it is now expanding to also have a separate helpline for children, as well as a helpline for women. So, and in fact, this morning we had a discussion that perhaps we need such kind of help for a variety of other people as well. And I know that the IMA and the Indian Psychiatric Society have a helpline for doctors as well, so that doctors and other frontline workers can also be helped. So there are certainly these helplines. But I think it's also about creating local resources, for example, educational institutions, workplaces. A lot of workplaces are trying to now create, support across the spectrum. So similarly, educational institutions and other places need to do this because a lot of it is simple self-help. I'm talking from the mental health perspective, simple self-help strategies as to how you can make sure you deal with situations in a pragmatic and a calm manner, but at the same time, don't give rise to panic and support people who are in any kind of distress. Today, the person in the Rotary Club was mentioning that, their volunteers, and I'm saying this because Sunita, you mentioned earlier about the training, and Anand also mentioned that if they're not properly trained and also not properly able to handle the kind of emotional pressures of providing this kind of support, they can be overwhelmed. So today, apparently, the people in the war room, they were inundated with calls, and there were members of the public, if things didn't go right, were actually piling on to the people who were providing the counseling, and that can be very traumatic. So I think training and being able to handle this is equally important. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So the next question is about clarify the misconception of deaths due to COVID-19 vaccination. So just checking who would be able to take that question. The misconception of deaths due to COVID-19 vaccination. Dr. Anand, do you think you would want to start there?
Sure. So maybe I can start, and the other experts can kindly maybe add on. So one has to recognize that the vaccines are relatively new, but it's also true that many vaccines have been given out all across the world, including in India, and the vaccines are largely safe. There's one thing we can certainly say with a certain level of confidence, that given the literally millions of vaccines which have been given out, that these are largely safe. It's unlikely that there can be a death attributed to the vaccine, but there is always a rare chance that there could be a serious adverse event. And these are typically called adverse events following immunization, and perhaps even deaths. As you would have all heard, there have been issues around, say, clotting with some of the vaccines, and there have been, these descriptions abroad. Some people might have allergic reactions to some components within the vaccine. Some of them might have pre-existing comorbidity, which might be a factor, etc. So I think what is extremely important, one is to reinforce that vaccines are very safe. That having been said, it's also important to recognize that there could be rare circumstances where there could be adverse events following immunization. What is important is for these to be catalogued and for these to be responded to, so that we know what is the prevalence of these kinds of events happening, and then also these people should be provided immediate care. So what is also important is for our volunteers, when they talk about vaccines, to let folks in the community know that it is important to keep a lookout for any adverse events or any side effects that they're seeing following immunization. Typically, anyway, after COVID-19 vaccination, you're supposed to stay for 30 minutes for observation, which is when most of the immediate reactions will happen, especially anaphylactic reactions. But beyond that, if you start seeing anything which is a serious side effect, that you should access medical care immediately, because most of these can be addressed at that level. So I think it'd be fair to say that vaccines are safe, but there can be a rare circumstance of some kind of an adverse event, including potentially death. But it's not something to worry about at a population level. We should keep a track on these as we give more and more vaccines.
Sunita,
Ramesh, yes.
what happens is any intervention, for that matter, any intervention in medical field has its own risk. And always we weigh risk versus benefit. And when you consider that risk versus benefit, the vaccination outweighs the benefit far, far, far more than anything else. So therefore, and we say that vaccine is safer. Nobody can say that's 100%. Probably God alone has to bless us and say yes, what it can be. But certainly the risk is very, very less.
Thank you. That should be reassuring.
Almost the risk is 0.0002%. So that safe is our vaccine.
So the follow-on question. Sorry, Doctor.
Yeah, probably traveling in Bangalore 1 kilometer is much more riskier in a general sense than taking a vaccine. Understand?
And we have survived it, so we are fine. We lived in Bangalore for far too long. Anyway, the follow-on question was, when there are comorbid conditions like diabetes, hypertension in the elderly, is it okay for them to go ahead with the vaccination?
Yeah, in fact, the people with the comorbidity like hypertension, diabetes, and smoking, and the asthma, and those who have undergone bypass surgery or angioplasty, these are the people, they are more prone for the morbidity and mortality. Hence, they must take vaccination much more. And that is the reason our Prime Minister in the first itself, he said that the Corona warriors, along with the senior citizens, because they are at a higher risk. Because if you compare, take the mortality rate is 1.02 in the general population, whereas in the Corona warriors, it is anywhere between 10 to 15%. And hence they have to take only one thing is, if they are taking the blood thinners like aspirin or clopidogrel or anticoagulants, and then after the injection, they have to press that area for about 5 to 10 minutes so that there is no hematoma, no bleeding. Otherwise, absolutely safe and no need to stop any drugs.
Any questions at Dr. Sunita? Abhay?
Sorry, there are questions. No, there are lots of questions. So what do we do with the time? Because we are supposed to stop at 5:30 and we are full of questions.
See, I would like to ask Dr. Pratima once, what I see, along with Dr. Pratima, the mental health experts came and appealed to the media. I see still they're playing a major problem. What they are showing, the crematorium scene, the hospital scene, is causing a lot of trauma to the people who are tested positive. That's when they are not seeking help, to motivate them. What can we do? They rightfully came early and appealed to the media. Please don't do that, but I don't think they seem to have stopped it. What can we do? This is a major barrier for us to go into the community, encouraging even people who are not tested positive, and even those who are tested positive, big challenge now in the context of this saturation of information. Ma'am, what shall we do?
I mean, I think it's not fair to vilify anybody. I mean, I think everybody has a responsibility. And I think there is a lot of media which also is responsible in terms of the way reporting is done. But I think the most important thing, I believe, is in addition to showing up the difficulties and challenges that people say, the restoration of practical, ways of getting help, optimism, are very, very crucial. So I think balancing out difficulties, the challenges that we face, which are real challenges, along with ways of overcoming these challenges and getting help appropriately, and sharing stories of the 85% of people who actually do, get better, or home care, which people get better. I think these balances are what need to be done across the board. And I think that's true for all of us.
Dr. Pratima, just extending that a little bit. For example, one of the slides that Dr. Ravi had shown, how the chances of transmission reduces when both people are wearing masks and there is social distance. So if those could be the DP pictures on WhatsApp, or somehow we want to start promoting the visual effect of that. And also what you just said very aptly, 85% of the people are getting better. We are forgetting the 85. This is not even glass half full. This is glass 85% full, but we somehow forget that. So the positive messaging, how do we reinforce that?
Sunita, one of the, I think the most important things, and I think both Dr. Ravi and Dr. Ban alluded to that, is that we forget these basic importance, especially the public. I mean, I think both in, just wearing masks, if you actually go around, you'll find that somehow fining people for not wearing masks, I don't know how much it has helped, but people don't wear masks appropriately. They've got their masks below their mouth. There are people playing on the road because it's it's a free time, and they really, there's the understanding of the seriousness, the potential seriousness of this particular thing, the understanding that if I'm infected, that I will, what I need to do is just isolate so that it prevents, the entire community. So this kind of work, communities working together, I think can only happen in smaller groups. I mean, at one level, you can give public messaging, but I think certainly local communities need to get together and spread these messages and have some way of communicating. And I think that's missing even in our basic way of managing our own health care. I think and in fact, local communities have actually been very successful. I know in some places, even in accessing care when it's necessary for the people in their community. So better organization, better information sharing, better COVID appropriate behaviors, as well as better networking, I think is very, very important. And I think for larger public health to actually develop, well in our country, we need to start a variety of these efforts, including, of course, strengthening our systems.
Rightly said, Dr. Pratima, because we are looking at community participation finally. From Alma Ata, we have been talking continuously. I think now we have a once in a lifetime opportunity to make this community centric. There is a question on post-COVID issues, or what is it that needs to be, what should people be aware of after they have been discharged from the hospital? What are the precautions they need to take? What else do they need to be aware of? Dr. Vijayalakshmi, would you like to take that?
Yeah. Dr. Ravi is not there?
Yes, Dr. Ravi sir is there.
Sir, if he wants to speak, it's okay. Otherwise, I'll take up that question.
It's about post-COVID, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we should realize, I think Dr. Vijayalakshmi very beautifully said about children. Remember, the serious multi-system inflammatory syndrome occurs 2 to 3 weeks after COVID, number one. So the story doesn't end with the acute illness of COVID. We all know that there are many, many complications of COVID that occur 2 to 3 weeks later. So people who have recovered from COVID need to be very, very vigilant of any new symptom they get. Cardiac, we know there are many complications. Strokes, because there is clots that go to the brain. People have had pancreatitis and they have developed diabetes. People have had kidney injury and they have developed renal failures. In children, So I think post-COVID care, we did start clinics at the end of the first wave. And as Anand said, non-COVID was neglected. So once we started opening up and the first wave subsided, then non-COVID, there was a lot of rush. So people stopped attending to post-COVID care clinics. Right now in the news, what is very, very alarming is about the black fungus, and that is a post-COVID infection, especially in people who are diabetics and who have had steroid therapy. So I think there are many things that we need to communicate, that even after you recover from COVID, you can have complications. So you need to seek medical help. Not to alarm people, but to make them aware that you need to seek medical assistance.
I think Dr. Ravi has put it very well. And everybody is talking about the lung involvement and the CT and capping the price of the CT. But what people are forgetting is whatever pneumonia has occurred now, even if the virus stops growing and then they come back home, they can heal by fibrosis and then they can become breathless later on. And those who have not had anything, especially youngsters, this coronavirus, they can go and damage the inner layer of the blood vessels and cause the thrombosis, as Dr. Ravi told, and that can cause heart attack in these people. And on children, they'll have the myocarditis where the muscle is damaged. And in the youngsters, the heart attacks have become very common. And if the blood vessels going to the brain, they get thrombosed and they can have the stroke also. And as a result, not only the stress-induced, even pancreatic-induced diabetes are more prominent. And as a result, don't be happy that 85% people are recovering. But out of that 85%, how many of them have got the irreversible damage is not known. And that's the reason one has to be very careful. Post-COVID, one has to keep in mind, and they have to involve themselves in pranayama, breathing, and do the Surya Namaskara where vitamin D is there. And this vitamin D, along with others, can help them to recover faster.
In addition, let me just add in terms of the neuropsychiatric sequelae, Dr. Vijayalakshmi mentioned strokes. You can also get other psychiatric disorders manifesting de novo. Also, there's something called long COVID, where people can continue to have symptoms of fatigue, extreme degrees of lethargy for sort of many months after COVID. So I think these are things that people need to know about.
Some of them have got the memory lost and concentration, all those problems are there.
Doctor, there are lots of questions, but when I look at them, most of it has been answered by one of you during your presentation. But the one that would be very important for us is, as volunteers, when we are supporting and motivating the quarantine patients, but mainly the caregivers at home, what are those golden rules that we have to follow in what we tell them about the do's and don'ts? Because there are a lot of things that I see on the guidelines. For example, one of the guidelines says put all the masks and infected things into a plastic bag and leave it in the sun for 72 hours before it is handed to the garbage collector. Or they say something like, for 72 hours, let's say in a village, there are dogs around, there are rodents around, there are other kids around who can go and touch it out of inquisitiveness. So it's not like we have these wonderful isolated places where you can leave that. The other thing that is constantly said is, if one person is infected in the family, then make sure the bathroom is consistently clean and disinfected. Now, the issues to do with the money for the disinfection, as well as if the person is running 20 times because of diarrhea, how do you keep people safe? Please go ahead.
Yeah, these two are very, very important. And those volunteers and like the corona warriors working with the patients who are highly infected, not only the wearing the mask, they have to wear the face shield also, because even through the eyes, the infection can go. So the face shield is very important. And there is no need to throw your mask here and there. You can just, I showed you how to remove it from the ears, and without touching the front part, you dip it in the Savlon or the Dettol soap for about soap water for 15 to 20 minutes, and then put it for drying. And within half an hour, the whole thing becomes dry. And you can try that. It is not. So instead of throwing here and there, better to dip it in the antiseptic thing. And another thing you said about the toilet is, if they have one separate toilet for the infected person, that is extremely good, because we are all the time talking about what comes out of the nose and the throat, the mouth as a droplet. But what we are not worried is there is a shedding of crores and crores of virus through the intestine, because 22 feet intestine is affected, especially the ileum, and the shredding of the virus is through that. So even the platters or the stools, they themselves can be infected. And that's why after the toilet, the person who has used not only should close the commode and flush it and wash the hand, not 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and better to have the foot controlled tap, so that instead of turning the knob and then washing and again turning, that can be infective. And apart from that, the toilet sanitizers are there. If you don't have many toilets, now you have got the scrub which can sanitize the commode, the top and everything, and that also can be used. So not only the toilet and the bathroom sanitization, the commode sanitization, flushing and the hand wash, everything is very important.
Dr.
Now
Sunita,
we're talking of the yeah, we have to definitely stop.
yeah.
I get the
Any more questions, or we will give one few seconds, maybe 1 second, 30 minutes or 30 seconds, sorry. The final remark by the panelists will close, or is there any pertaining persistent questions?
No, Chanda, what we can do, Sunita can sort out all the questions and relate it to our the panelists and send them on the, over their email ID.
Yes,
and if you have the contact number, and you can give them, and so that they can even reply them if needed, so that everybody gets a chance to talk to them at their leisure.
Even the voice notes are good. So if you don't have to sit and type it, sending voice notes is better, because then we can make a repository of these things so we can go back and listen to it. What we are doing is basically recording all of this, making it available as a resource, so that anytime we feel we need to go back and listen to what one of you has said, it will be easily available for us. So that will be good.
Any question? You need to ask any question. There is or else we just close.
No, I said there are still a whole lot of questions, and most of them revolve around home quarantine.
Dr. Ramesh has suggested, since in view of a time constraint, I think I would request the panelists to the final remark, a concluding remark, just 1 minute, and then we will close it formally, and then definitely we will thank everyone, and we will reach out to then answer with the answers to all the participant questions they raised. Yes, over to whoever, ma'am, the final remark.
Dr. Ravi first.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for having me on the show. I think we are a long way off from protection, another year at least. Please use social vaccine and the physical vaccine. Both are essential. Be responsible, avoid crowds, avoid closed spaces. I'm sure we can get over this pandemic.
Thank you very much.
Sir. Thank you, sir.
And my final message is, anyone who is infected, after getting infected, being positive, if he roams around, that means he's not only committing suicide, he's committing homicide. So better to quarantine and don't move around. That is the first and the foremost thing. And the second most important thing is, stop blaming the people, especially the doctors and the staff who are working round the clock. They are, it is unimaginable the amount of pressure they are working with. And one idiot comes and tells there is no corona, people are making fuss, and only doctors killed my son. See, this sort of irresponsible things should not be shown, and the doctors are, in fact, sacrificing their family and their life, and they
Yes.
are under tremendous pressure. Give respect to the people who are trying to help you, and that is the second thing. And the third thing is, stop blaming the government. The government is making a stupendous effort, not getting oxygen and dying because of lack of oxygen. No, the death is there because of the lung damage, and they are not capable of taking. The ventilators are not going to help you. The oxygen is not going to help you. The prevention of the lung infection by corona is the only one which can be saved. That is, prevention is better than cure. And just because vaccine has come, when the vaccine came, they started saying, oh, this is the Indian vaccine, there is no study. And now suddenly they are all rushing for the vaccine. Remember, vaccine is like a helmet. It only prevents the head injury to some extent, but it doesn't prevent the accident. So to prevent the accident, you have to go slowly or keep the distance, wear the mask. The real vaccine is wearing the mask, keeping the social distance, and maintaining the health and the hygiene, and changing your lifestyle. And every one of you is a soldier, and you have to fight against the corona, and stop blaming the people for unnecessary things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, who's going next? Dr. Anand or Dr. Pratima, ma'am?
I'll go
Yes.
after Dr. Pratima.
Yes, Anand.
Thanks, Dr. Anand. Yes, I just like to say that it is certainly expected that there will be a mental health, flux of mental health problems, and people talk about a mental health pandemic following the COVID-19 pandemics. But I think the most important thing is not to panic, but to be prepared, not to be able to help oneself, but at the same time know how to reach out for help, and recognize what are common emotional responses to a stressful situation like this. Learn how to manage that. But at the same time, if it becomes very difficult, or if there are, there's a mental health crisis, or there are severe mental health problems, to reach out for help. There are various kinds of helplines for psychosocial help, for emotional help, for tobacco and alcohol help, variety of things. So please reach out and develop resilient communities so that we can go through this effectively. Thank you.
Yeah, again, just to add on, I think, first of all, a lot of appreciation to all the volunteers who are stepping up to help out. I think if we have, a workforce like you, all of you, involved in the response, we'll probably be better equipped. It's extremely important to remember that, information is probably our best ally in our response. So if you can keep yourself updated on the do's and don'ts, and a lot of that we've already discussed today, that would be great. Have mechanisms of reaching out wherever you have doubts, so that you can clarify them and ensure that you pass on the right information. I think, as Professor Ravi said, and all the other panelists reinforced, if we follow just the public health precautions, we know these work. Make sure that you also help people make decisions around what is appropriate, what is not. There is now enough evidence, for example, to indicate plasma therapy might really not be useful at all. There's been large studies which have shown that it has hardly any use, either from a clinical benefit or a mortality perspective. So if you can also help families who are sometimes just struggling with decisions and might not have access to information, that would be really great. And remember, all of us are learning. This is a new disease, so it is also important to stay on top of the information and hence act accordingly. But once again, all appreciation to the volunteers, because this might seem like an onerous task, but all your work will be really very beneficial to the communities that you work with. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Anand. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank your eminent panelists. They are busy actually around the clock. Yeah, everyone, I know them personally, that they are connecting to many they're trying to reach out in their own way to help all of us to deal with this pandemic. So I really want to thank each one of Dr. Ravi. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation and being with us and then helping us. And then I would like to thank Dr. Vijayalakshmi ma'am. Thank you so much for your constant support, and then you will continue to guide us. And I would like to thank Dr. Pratima ma'am She's also very busy. She helped us to get Dr. Ravi on the panel. Thank you so much for that. And ma'am, I would like to thank you so much. And we need definitely, there is a lot to do in your area. I think, I guess we have to do. And I'm working in Ramnagara district. Sunita is working in Chamaraj with a group of volunteers. And we will come to you for the help of how to deal with the mental health area. So we'll come back to you. Thank you, Dr. Anant, for you. The public health is important. Anant, one question I've been asking, even today I was asking another group is also, the whole focus in firefighting, mopping the floor, when are people going to focus on turning off the tap? It means we also have to, the whole, our tertiary secondary care system is overburdened, pressurized. We need to reduce, means we need to strengthen the preventive care so that more people are not coming to that level. Home quarantine, a lot of challenges are there. We will look up to you, to Dr. Anand, to help us from the strengthening our public health action part also. Especially thanks to Dr. Sunita for the Q&A session managing it. And above all, I would like to thank a person this evening, Mr. Jitin, who was helping us in the background, preparing for this, everything, the YouTube streaming and all the testing and everything, connecting with the panelists, testing everything. And he's a jack of many trades. Thank you, Jitin, for your help. And thank you. Thank you, one and all. Dr. Sunita, final words.
One request, sorry. This is just one very simple request. We are all working in different ways. And for example, in the Mysore district with 7 Gram Panchayats, we are working as a group of us from Gram, which is the NGO, and reaching out for home quarantine and also the discharge patients, when they return home, that 1 week of intensively taking care of them by calling them up, as well as the psychosocial support in terms of food packets, etc. So preparation of those materials, if I may kindly request you to take a look at what we come up with, because it is also about bringing in the community itself. So we are working with the ASHA workers, with the field workers, in getting what is realistic, because we can't tell them quarantine them with 1 room which has an attached bathroom. That is not going to work in the village setup. So based on such things, it would be really nice if those of you who have gathered decades of experience, if you can just browse through those 5 pages, ultimate 5 pages that comes out, because this is like a pilot test. And if we can get this right with the help of all of you, then when that starts to roll out into the COVID task force at the Gram Panchayats, then the IAM person was here, they are working in Tumkur. Chandan is working in Ramnagara. So we are all working through those community-centric spaces where it would be really nice to have experts that will take a look at what we come out as a final 5-page document, which will then be handed over to the COVID Gram Panchayat task force, and then they will be taking it forward from there. Please, may I, get some assistance there, because that kind of, what do you say, it's a snowball effect.
Thank you.
And it will not be onerous on you, because we're not expecting you to be a part of the whole 2 months process. It's a part of, pre-final stage. Only then, once we get your inputs, then we finalize the document. And it will be a 5-page document, nothing major about that.
Thank you, Dr. Sunita. So we started this webinar with Dr. Ramesh's initial opening remarks. Sir, we will close it with your final word. So thank you, sir. Over to you, and we'll close with your final words.
Thank you, Linda. This is exactly what I said. Each one of our citizens has to put their best foot at this juncture to help the suffering humanity. And that's exactly what our society is doing. I'm very happy and with the, with the panelists and all the other coordinators and what they are doing. All the best, and I hope we will conquer this pandemic at some day, and which will be very short. Thank you so much.
Once again, thank you all. Let's continue the good work.